All right, welcome everyone to the second installment of our Acadiana Business Resource webinars. These webinars are brought to you by business resource partners from across the Acadiana region, including One Acadiana, LIDA, Opportunity Machine, the Downtown Development Authority, the Louisiana Small Business Development Center at UL Lafayette, Acadiana Workforce Solutions, the United Way of Acadiana, the Acadiana Planning Commission, and other local chambers and economic development offices, including the Acadia Parish Chamber of Commerce and Vermilion Economic Development Alliance. We have come together to support Acadiana's business community, particularly our small businesses, in response to COVID-19 by hosting a series of webinars on timely and relevant topics. Today's second installment of our Acadiana Business Resource webinar series is presented by the Picard Group on the COVID-19 federal response and what it means for small businesses. After the presentation, we will use the remaining time for Q&A. As you have questions, please enter them into the chat bot, which can be accessed using the chat bubble icon. We will be recording the questions as we go. If we do not have time to get to your question during today's webinar, we will follow up with you as soon as possible afterwards, and we will try to compile a list of questions and answers to share with everyone. Without further ado, I will now turn it over to Tyron Picard, founder and principal of the Picard Group, to introduce today's presenters. Tyron, if you could unmute yourself.
How's that?
Perfect.
Good. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us, and thank you to the Coalition and to One Acadiana for inviting our team to present. Before I introduce our presenters from our Washington office today, I can tell you, if you haven't heard, that everything we will present today is now, in fact, law, as in the past hour, the House of Representatives, by virtue of a voice vote, was able to pass the package as constructed and unanimously passed in the Senate. So it is now a law. And for those of you whom we do not know, just a short introduction. Our firm, the Picard Group, is a state and federal governmental affairs firm and a business consulting group with offices in Washington, D.C. and Louisiana. And I'm honored today that two of our three federal partners, Bacque and Hunter Hall, will be presenting. Congressman Rodney Alexander, unfortunately, had a prior commitment. He is also a member of our federal team in Washington, but was unable to participate today. Bacque spent 6 years on the staff of former U.S. Senator John Breaux in Washington, D.C., and has been in lobbying and governmental affairs for 15 years, and was the original federal partner of the Picard Group 9 years ago. Hunter Hall is a former staffer for U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, where he spent 2 years, and then after that was a White House appointee by President Trump to the Commerce Department as an assistant to the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross. And he's been with the firm now for 2 years. So thank you for the opportunity and to hopefully share some information with our friends and neighbors as we try to assist everyone during this unprecedented time in our state and our nation's history. And without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Emily and Hunter in Washington.
Good afternoon. This is Emily Bacque.
We can hear you.
Yeah, great. Good afternoon. We are going to give an update on what's been happening in Congress over the last few weeks. Andre, next slide, please. Next slide.
Enter your attendee ID number, followed by pound. If you do not know your attendee number.
Okay. And so, as I said, we're going to give an update on what's been happening the last few weeks. Congress has passed now, as Tyron said, 3 pieces of legislation, and they've really just been in triage mode. As you can imagine, it's been very intense. And so now, once they've gotten these out of the way, I really think there's going to be a focus on recovery moving forward. The first bill, the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Act, was passed on, or President Trump signed it on March 6th, which seems like a year ago and was just only a few weeks ago. At that time, Congress was really focused on, vaccine development funding and then pushing out funding to state and locals for the public health crisis. Again, that totaled about $8.3 billion. Next slide, please. Then on March 17th, President Trump signed the Family First Coronavirus Response Act into law. It's estimated at $100 billion. They honestly weren't able to get a score on it because they moved so quickly. And there were several things in there, but there were 2 key elements: free testing for anyone who wants it, and then, of course, paid Family Medical Leave Act and sick leave, which we'll discuss further in depth later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So the CARES Act, that's the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, which just passed the House, as Tyron said a little bit earlier today, and passed the Senate on Thursday night. It is $2 trillion. It's the largest bill that Congress has ever passed. It dwarfs the stimulus in 2009, which at the time we thought was so big, which was $800 billion. Just going to go through some of the key elements of this bill. Of course, there's funding for individual payments, $1,200 for qualifying adults, and $500 for qualifying kids under 16, $2,400 for those adults filing jointly. So if you're a family of 4, you could see $3,400 rebate. Of course, with individuals as well, there's unemployment insurance, which we'll get to later. There is aid to industries included in it as well. It's $500 billion in loans and loan guarantees. This is for passenger airlines, cargo airlines, critical businesses. They were really trying to help Boeing with the critical business piece. And then, of course, loans and loan guarantees for state and locals and other industries. Then aid to small businesses. There's over $375 billion included in the bill for small businesses. And of course, Hunter will go into detail later on in the presentation. And then the 5th component is aid to the healthcare industry. There's a public health and emergency services fund, which totals $100 billion. We have heard some concerns from smaller and rural hospitals that they may have trouble accessing this funding because it may take too long. So we're waiting to see how all of this fleshes out. But the language in the bill states that the Secretary shall, on a rolling basis, review applications and make payments. I should just note that not only for this funding, but for a lot of the elements in the bill, we're waiting on agencies to release regs on how to access the aid. So as we're going through this, I know you all will have questions and we're going to try and answer as best we can, but for some of them, we may just not have answers quite yet as we wait for guidance from the agencies. And now, next slide, please. Hunter is going to focus on the Phase 3 legislation as it relates to small businesses.
Thank you, Emily. This is Hunter Hall. I want to talk a little bit about the small business provisions as they relate to the CARES Act. The first section within the CARES Act is called the Paycheck Protection Program, and it's the first one because it's probably the most important. The Paycheck Protection Program included in this phase 3 is a fully guaranteed forgivable loan that will cover payroll costs, including paid sick leave, paid medical leave, utilities, mortgage interest, and or rent, and then interest on any other debt obligations for any 8-week period between February 15th and June 30th. The maximum loan amount will be the lesser of $10 million or 2.5 times the average monthly payroll of the previous 12 months up to February 15th, 2020. Under this Paycheck Protection Program, SBA has authorized $350 billion to benefit businesses and 501c3s with under 500 employees, veterans organizations, sole proprietors, independent contractors, and other self-employed individuals. This will also benefit businesses with over 500 employees that meet applicable size standards established by the SBA for the industry in which they operate. There's a provision that allows businesses with over 500, with more than one physical location and under 500 employees at each location. If you qualify, if your industry qualifies, then you are still considered a small business, even though the business as a whole has over 500 employees. The loan conditions that they're offering for the Paycheck Protection Program are exceptional. It includes a waiver of all fees for the borrower and the lender, a waiver of collateral and personal guarantee requirements during the covered period, waives affiliation rules for businesses in hospitality and restaurant industries. Interest rates cannot exceed 4%. Payments, if you do end up owing money, payments are deferred automatically for 12 months. The maturity of that loan would be 10 years. And even in the case of a default, the SBA will still reimburse the bank for the amount owed. Now, what makes this Paycheck Protection Program so enticing is the forgivable loan portion. The amount of the loan eligible for forgiveness is proportional to the number of employees retained on payroll compared to the previous 12-month period ending February 15th, 2020. The amount will be reduced proportionally also compared to if you reduce any employee's pay beyond 25% of the employee's prior year compensation. For the purposes of determining forgiveness amounts, the payroll costs will exclude compensation in excess of $100,000, including paid sick leave, qualified family leave, wages, etc. Lenders will be required to verify payroll costs and payments made on debt obligations for approval, and forgiveness amounts will not be included in this year's taxable income. One important thing to note, borrowers that rehire workers that have been laid off between February 15th and April 1st will not have those numbers count against them for loan forgiveness purposes, so long as they rehire those employees by June 30th of 2020. So if a business out of precaution had let go of a number of employees, as long as they rehire them by June 30th, their loan forgiveness amount will not be reduced in conjunction with those numbers. Running parallel to the Paycheck Protection Program is the Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan. This is the 7B portion of SBA loans. This provides necessary working capital to small businesses and nonprofits, similar to Paycheck Protection. The Economic Income Disaster Loan, they will also waive personal guarantees on advances and loans below $200,000, provided that business has been in operation for 1 year prior to the disaster. The enticing portion of the EIDL is an emergency grant of $10,000 that SBA must pay within 3 days to an eligible entity that has applied for an EIDL loan due to COVID-19. Though that $10,000 grant that you'll receive within 3 days must be used for payroll costs, rent, mortgage, and other debt obligations. It is important to note that if you file for the EIDL and you do receive the $10,000 grant, but you instead decide to utilize the 7A Paycheck Protection Loan, that $10,000 grant will be reduced from the forgiveness portion of the loan. I would recommend interested borrowers evaluate both programs and then choose accordingly. One of the last things I want to talk about is if you currently have an SBA loan that you are paying on, a loan that originated prior to February 15th, 2020, there is a subsidy for those loan payments. Principal, interest, and fees on existing SBA loan products, including a 7A loan, Community Advantage, 504, and microloan. The SBA is going to make those payments for you for 6 months to provide relief for eligible businesses negatively affected by COVID-19. I look forward to answering any questions on these programs and others in the Q&A portion. I'm going to toss it back over to Emily to discuss obligations for employers.
Next slide, please. Great. So as far as employer obligations, we really want to focus on paid leave. We threw unemployment insurance in here as well. We'll get to that, but the focus here really is paid leave. And of course, that was included in the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which was signed by the President on March 18th. I'm saying that date again because it's effective 15 days after enactment. DOL guidance is saying that this will begin on April 1st. Everyone else calculates March 18th plus 15 days as April 2nd, but DOL is saying April 1st, so that's what we'll go with. There are 2 new refundable payroll tax credits as it relates to FMLA and sick leave. So which employers are covered? Well, businesses with fewer than 500 employees. Employers with fewer than 50 employees can be exempted from the leave requirements related to school and daycare closings if paying the mandated benefits would jeopardize the viability of the benefits. We are still awaiting guidance from DOL on what must be proven for exception to apply. Now, events that trigger paid leave, subject to government quarantine or isolation order. This is not the same as a state or local stay-at-home order. A doctor's order to self-quarantine. Experiencing symptoms and seeking diagnosis. Caring for a quarantined individual, not necessarily limited to a family member. Caring for a child whose school or daycare is closed. And experiencing other substantially similar conditions as specified by the Secretary of HHS in consultation with DOL and Treasury. Now, what must be provided to covered employees? For sick leave, it's 2 weeks or up to 80 hours at the employee's regular rate of pay if the worker is quarantined or has symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis. As it relates to family leave, 2 weeks or up to 80 hours at 2/3 regular rate if the worker needs to care for an individual under quarantine, and up to 10 additional weeks to care for a child whose school or daycare has closed if the employee has been on the payroll for 30+ days. A worker can use employer-provided paid leave for the first 2 weeks at 100% pay at their choice. Now, for part-time workers, leave is provided for his or her average number of hours over a 2-week period. If the schedule varies, use a 6-month average to calculate the daily hours. If an employee has not been there for 6 months yet, use the scheduled hours agreed to at time of hire. This applies for paid sick leave or paid family medical leave. And then as far as unemployment insurance, the language that's included in the CARES Act does three things. It offers more for the benefit, it increases the duration of the benefit, and it extends it to the previously ineligible. So it creates a temporary pandemic unemployment assistance program through December 31st, 2020, to provide payment to those not traditionally eligible for unemployment benefits. This includes the self-employed, independent contractors, and those with limited work history. We've heard lots about gig workers. This would help them. It provides an additional $600 per week payment on top of state unemployment benefits to each recipient for an additional 13 weeks, which ends up being up to 39 weeks for COVID-19 related unemployment. Next slide, please. And now we'll touch on next steps for Congress. As we've noted, the House did pass the CARES Act a little bit earlier, and so now they will head home. The Senate passed it on Thursday night, and the leader announced at that time that they would not come back for votes until April 20th. Of course, they can be called back if they feel like it's necessary to take some steps prior to then. As we mentioned before, we do expect multiple packages to come, again, more focused on recovery as opposed to triaging the emergency that they've done with the last three packages. Hunter is going to touch on priorities that we are already hearing for these packages.
Thank you, Emily. So just yesterday, we heard from NRCC Chairman Tom Emmer and the House Transportation Infrastructure Ranking Member Sam Graves about Phase 4. The initial focus for the Phase 4 funding is going to be transportation infrastructure projects, a FAST Act reauthorization, and a likely 2-year reauthorization of WRDA, Water Resources Development. Now, Chairman Emmer did say, and we've heard this from senators, from staffers on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers, this bill is going to expand for sure to include postal reform. It'll include pensions, more aid for states and local municipalities. You're obviously going to see more aid for hospitals, providers, doctors regarding supplies. Expanding access to care through, whether it be through telehealth or beds in states of particular concern. And they're also going to be looking to plug holes where Phase 3 fell short. This package, this is an unprecedented moment in time, and Congress is taking unprecedented measures to meet the demand and meet the concerns that everyone has. So I don't think you can rule anything out of Phase 4. We are also expecting a Phase 5 and a Phase 6 somewhere in the next 3 to 6 months as well. Again, their biggest concern is access to care, access to capital, and making sure that once we can reopen the economy, that businesses will be able to go back as normal. Before I toss it over to Tyron for the Q&A portion, I do want to say, this package also includes a number of healthcare provisions, education provisions. There's a treasury lending facility for larger corporations. We can talk about that and more. We recommend, as you look to Phase 4, we recommend businesses that don't have time to track all this on a regular basis, reach out to your attorney, reach out to your CPA or your federal lobbyist to discuss the impacts of Phase 3 on your industry and also to assess your industry's needs in Phase 4. So with that, I'll throw it over to Tyron Picard to open it up for question and answer.
Yeah, thank you, Hunter. I know this was a lot to digest in a short period of time, and but just a few fundamentals here to make sure that the most important takeaways. The Paycheck Protection loans, which will allow you up to 8 weeks of forgivable business expenses, will be administered through your local banks. So contact your, this should allow for a rapid deployment of capital. So contact your local banker, and if you are pursuing or wish to pursue that, that means of recovery. Again, it's 8 weeks of forgivable expenses are removed from the principal, and whatever remaining amounts left on the principal are payable over a 10-year period of time, with a 1-year suspension on even commencement of the payments, and interest rates cannot be higher than 4%. If you are pursuing the EIDL, that goes through the regular SBA channels. So an SBA lender would be the one. So just making sure that everybody understands that. A couple of questions that have come in through, and let me mention one other thing before I go to the questions. We are in the process of putting together a healthcare specific presentation. There was just so much surrounding healthcare eligibility, various aspects, whether it's hospitals, home health, additional payments, telehealth. That was included in the bill that literally we could have consumed the hour just talking about healthcare. So we will be producing a healthcare focused presentation. One question that did come in, Hunter, you mentioned 501c3s, but do we know if 501c6s are included in the Paycheck Protection Program?
Right. So the Paycheck Protection Program lists eligible entities as a small business under 500, a 501c3 nonprofit, a 501c19 veterans organization, or a tribal business concern described in Section 31 of the Small Business Act that has no more than 500 employees. It also has an exception for, as I mentioned earlier, this is important for the hospitality industry. It has a provision that allows businesses with more than 500 employees spread out in more than one location, where each location has less than 500 employees. Those would be eligible as well. Unfortunately, 501c6s were not listed in here, but I wish I could help you out there, Anita.
That may be a question of guidance from the agency, since there's that may have simply just been an omission on their part.
Right.
This bill was put together. It was 800. I think it was 887 pages that were comprised over about an 8 to 10 day period of time. So a lot of agency guidance is going to be forthcoming, I think. Another question was from Katie. She said, we purchased an existing business in December of 2019. Will we qualify for an EIDL grant?
Yes, you will qualify for the EIDL grant. However, you will not qualify as this is written, the way that we've received it. Again, we're going to wait on guidance, but the way it's written now, you would qualify. However, you would not qualify for the waiver of a personal guarantee on the advance or the loan. So yes, you would qualify, but you would not be able to have a waiver on loans. If the loan is under $200,000, you will get a waiver of any personal guarantee on the advance or the loan if you've been in business for 1 year prior to the disaster. So again, you can qualify, but you will have to provide a personal guarantee on that loan.
Hunter or Emily, one of the questions was, most of the loan benefits seem to be tied to businesses with less than 500 employees. Can you give any clarity on what loan options are available to an employer with 850 total employees scattered across 15 locations?
So if every location within that business, the 15 locations, as long as they have under 500 employees, then you will qualify for this same paycheck protection. You'll have to go through a few more hurdles with SBA and the commercial lender to verify all of that. But yes, they included this provision, again, for hospitals, hospitality, restaurants, et cetera, to be able to take it where you'll have a significant number of employees, over 500, but are spread out amongst a number of franchises or locations. I saw another question in here another question related to the date of comparison for the number of employees. Written in here, the date of comparison is the 12-year period prior to February 15th, 12-month period prior to February 15th, 2020. Tyron, I'll toss it back over.
Yeah. Here's another question. If we don't have enough work to keep our workforce 100% utilized but want to maintain our entire workforce, is the PPP expecting businesses to pay all employees a similar amount to what the employee is accustomed to, or should they be paid for work being performed and then file unemployment for reduced hours? My hunch, and Hunter, if I'll take a swing at this, my hunch is that you're not going to be mandated to pay them what their wage that they were accustomed to, but you will only be able to deduct from your PPP loan those actual amounts which you did pay in wages, rent, utilities, as well as administrative expenses associated with payroll.
Correct. As I understand it now, Tyron, the way that SBA is discussing this, if you reduce an employee's salary by 25% or more than the average of the 12-year period, then that 25% or more will be deducted from your loan forgiveness portion, and you will owe that back in that 10-year loan repayment cycle.
Okay. And so, Hunter, a little more clarification on what is the end of the period of comparison for the employment level of PPP? Is it the end of the 8-week period? In other words,
through June 30th.
Through June 30th.
You have to maintain the employees through June 30th. And I will say they are laying the foundations now so that in phase 4 or if necessary phase 5, they can continue this paycheck protection program from June 30th through the third quarter of 2020. So this is a test run, a trial run, and if still necessary, come June 30th, they've got this in place and they're not afraid to utilize this again for the third quarter of this year.
So, Hunter, one question was, well, what if we aren't taking any revenue losses right now? What happens if we start taking losses in revenue later in the year and we don't have the issue now? I'm assuming it would still be prudent to begin the process of exploring what the access to those to the capital and the in that loan, as well as the forgiveness, might be with their banker. So,
in that case, I would wait for guidance regarding the SBA 7A loan portion because that runs through June 30th. However, the economic injury disaster loan, the EIDL, is open and available through December 30th of 2020. So you have until then to apply. If you don't see any economic injury until after June 30th, EIDL is still open and available. It's not the forgivable loan, but it is still an option beyond June 30th. And keep in mind, you can still apply for the 7A loan up until June 30th and use it retroactively for the 8 weeks prior to June 30th.
And Hunter, for purposes of the comparison on the workforce during the period, if there is a termination of an employee for a cause such as poor performance, et cetera, is that a factor in the, or did we get any clarification as to whether or not that would be a factor in the look back?
There has been no clarification regarding firing or letting go of an employee for cause. I would assume that SBA will address this in the guidance. However, I would operate as if that employee needs to stay on the payroll through this period to not damage your loan forgiveness portion. And then again, we'll wait for the SBA guidance to determine how they would handle that.
Andre, how are we doing on time?
We have about 15 to 20 minutes left. If there are still questions from participants, please enter them into the chat bot now.
Hi,
Hunter
this
or
is,
Emily. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I thought I saw a question about sick leave prior to April 1.
Yes.
And so that is not covered. It's only if the employee is sick, after April 1st, then it would be paid.
Right. And there was a question about, with the passage of the bill today, when will the PPP loans be available? You should be in touch with your bankers certainly at the early part of next week as they are beginning the process to administer those, because it is the intent, I believe, of the Congress that those funds be available immediately. Just so you know, that is part of the reason why, the loans are not subject to a credit score or a credit rating. The loans are not subject to a guarantee or a collateral. It does contain a affidavit or verification under penalty of perjury that the funds will be used in the business for the purposes that I articulated earlier, and so, but the fact that there is no need for a credit report, for collateral, processing fees, all those things should expedite the process of getting those funds out. One more question. A local banker advised a business that if they want to apply for an EIDL loan, not the $10,000 grant, they need to get the EIDL application in by March 31st. That was not seen in the bill, to my knowledge. Are any of you aware of that requirement? Hunter or Emily?
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that until very recently. I'm just seeing some documentation that says the current understanding of the legislation, a borrower can apply for direct SBA disaster loan and an SBA 7A loan if the disaster loan is applied for by March 31st. After March 31st, the borrower can only apply for either, but not both of those.
Okay. Question from Tiffany. Is any local bank capable of facilitating a 7A loan?
On SBA.gov, and we can have Andre distribute this, there is what's called a lender match tool, which will provide you with the contact information for SBA 7A loan approved commercial lenders. In these provisions, they also included an expedited process for lenders to become eligible to provide these SBA loan products. So I would go to the lender match tool on SBA.gov and find a local provider or go to your commercial lender that you've been using and ask if they could apply to participate in this program as well.
Do we know if a business or an individual has an outstanding IRS judgment, if that will disqualify them from participating in the PPP program?
We have not heard anything in relation to how IRS judgments would pair with these programs, but I would assume it would have no weight in this process based on everything that we have read. They're making this a very open, efficient process to allow for as many people to take advantage of as possible.
Yeah, there was nothing in statute, so my sense is we could see something in guidance.
So one of the questions was, hey, our employees are currently not working due to the business closure. Should they file for unemployment? And so that raises two questions. One is that in order to qualify for the PPP, the business has to be opened as of February 15th. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the other is that even if there were layoffs after February 15th, if those people are hired back before what date, Hunter or Emily, they can
by
still
June
be qualified.
30th.
By June 30th.
By June 30th.
June 30th, yeah.
So if you laid someone off between February 15th and today, if you hire them back by June 30th, you can count them on your payroll for purposes of your PPP forgivable loan.
I see a question down there about whether you can bring the same person back or hire someone in their place. Haven't seen anything specific related to that. I would wait for SBA guidance on that.
Okay. Let's see. A 501c3 agency that has essential personnel not cutting hours and need employees to report to work. So the question is, what about employees wanting to take 2 weeks off? What qualifications would make us exempt?
So the payroll cost included under the Paycheck Protection Program allows for paid sick, paid medical, paid family leave. It allows, it covers any and all payroll costs, state and local taxes as well. So if they're taking 2 weeks off and it's paid leave, it would fall under, they would still be eligible. Their payroll costs would still be eligible to be included and forgiven.
Okay. Here's a question from an independent consultant. I'm an independent consultant with an LLC, and I'm contracted with UL through federally funded grants for the next year. Will I be able to apply for a loss of salary since we were shut down? Our business was shut down due to the school and daycare closures.
Can you say that again, please, Tyron?
An independent consultant who has an LLC, presumably the single member LLC. He's contracted with the university through federally funded grants for the next year. Will he be able to apply for a loss of salary since the university is shut down and he's not able to perform the functions of the grant?
Yes. Yeah, it allows for sole proprietors and independent contractors to file for this paycheck protection program as long as the injury began after February 15th, 2020. So once the university shut down, I believe early mid-March, if that's when their business was put on hold, then they would qualify for the Paycheck Protection Program.
Yeah, and I'll touch on that just a little bit further. One of the things that was pretty remarkable about, and again, this was crafted to promote speed of deployment of capital, is that there are no subjective factors in the application criteria. It's simply, did you have a business or own a business with a payroll on a certain date? What was it for the period of the look back, and what are what expenses did you have that fit within the criteria? It doesn't in any way look into subjective factors such as, well, I was unable to work because of a work shutdown or university closure. It's got very, very clear objective factors that once those are completed and met, the lender should make the loan.
Tyron, one thing I want to highlight, I've seen a couple people mention a question from Booth, Tran, and Logan here. If our employees are not currently working due to business closure, should they file for unemployment? Should our business continue to include them on payroll, and the PPP will go towards the business continuing to make payroll? This relates very much to restaurants and other businesses directly impacted by the shelter-in-home procedures. So obviously, a lot of business owners or restaurant owners have let go of their employees to allow them to file for unemployment. If those employees are not brought back onto payroll by June 30th, you will not be eligible for the forgiveness portion of the Paycheck Protection Program. It will also, those employees will be deducted from the, will not be used whenever the lender is compiling all of the relevant information as far as previous employee payrolls prior to February 15th. So I guess what I'm trying to say is if you've let go of those employees already and you go to apply for the PPP, you can get a loan up to 2.5 times the previous 12 months, the average payroll. However, the forgiven portion will be relevant to the number of employees that you retain or bring back on by June 30th. So if your employees are out and they need to file for unemployment, great, but you should bring them back on by June 30th to be able to take advantage of the PPP. Otherwise, it'll be the unforgivable loan, the EIDL.
If someone has ownership in the entity that is applying for the PPP, is that person's payroll excluded from loan forgiveness?
If the person makes more than $100,000, the exclusion from loan forgiveness goes up to $100,000 of the salary.
Okay.
So yes, they'll forgive up to the $100,000.
In terms of claiming employees under the PPP, you can claim full-time W-2s, part-time, as well as contract employees. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Andre, how much time do we have left, Andre?
We're getting close to the end. We can wrap it up now unless someone wants to enter one final question into the chat bot. All right, well, if you do come up with additional questions as well, please send those to me. We're going to be trying to package all of the information from today's webinar, including the PowerPoint, a summary of the Q&A, and some related resources together to share with everyone in the follow-up materials. We'll also be sending a recording of the video of today's webinar as soon as it's ready. It probably will not be generated and uploaded until tomorrow morning, but be on the lookout for an email from us this weekend. We really want to thank the Picard Group, Tyron, Emily, and Hunter for today's presentation. We appreciate how quickly you were able to pull this together. Obviously, this is complex info and everything is evolving really quickly. So we really appreciate the information that you were able to share with us today.
It's our pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. And again, if we can stress to you, touch base with your bankers or your lawyer or your consultant because your CPA, all of them are getting national guidance and association guidance on particularly your banks. That would be my suggested first stop for you as we begin to sort of unravel these things.
And we are going to be taking a deeper dive into some of the issues addressed today through the upcoming webinars we're scheduling for next week. We're going to be doing one on the employment law implications, including the sick leave and family and medical leave provisions. We're planning to do that one at 9 a.m. Tuesday morning. And then we'll do one at 10:30 a.m. On Tuesday morning that focuses on assistance for gig workers, for sole proprietors, and for other self-employed individuals. It'll be open to a wider audience, but it'll focus most specifically on that audience. We're still pulling the details together for those, but we'll send information about those two webinars out this weekend as well. So stay tuned for some follow-up from us. Thank you again to the Picard Group, and thank you to our partner organizations, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. This is going to conclude our webinar.
Have a great day.